Well, the Nintendo Switch presentation has just concluded, and it was an interesting one. We were teased essentially throughout the entire hour that we were watching with The Legend of Zelda. When is the release date going to be? And of course, at the end, the big news, it will release March 3rd with the console. And I think that was absolutely essential because everything else that we saw in this presentation was quite frankly underwhelming. So I'm going to go through some of my notes here. As I said, launching on March 3rd, and it's going to be $299.99 here in North America. And I think that is just about the right price. I mean, I was kind of surprised that it wasn't $249 after the news that came out a little bit earlier last week. But I think $299 is just what I had predicted, and I think it places it comfortably beneath the competition, but still communicates to players that this is a television console. You know, it's not a handheld, and regardless of how much power it really has, I think that is an important message to convey, that, you know, you're getting a TV console here and not just a 3DS that hooks into your television. The other surprising thing, though, was that the online component to the system will be paid. You'll get a free trial, I guess, at launch, and then the pay service for the Nintendo online infrastructure, whatever they're going to call it, will start in the fall of 2017. Now, that comes as somewhat of a surprise, only because the quality of Nintendo's online service thus far has been really weak. You know, when PlayStation went from free on the PS3 to whatever it is now, $60 on the PS4, you kind of said, well, it was behind Xbox Live, but the PSN was nonetheless okay. I don't know what Nintendo has offered online to justify the price. We don't know what it's going to be, but, I mean, you could be looking at paying $180 a year for online play across 3 consoles. So I'm not a fan of that. Then again, I don't really play online, so it's not going to affect me. They then offset that rather negative announcement with the positive news that there will be no region locking. Finally, a Nintendo console, mainstream, modern Nintendo console, with no region locking. We haven't had that since the DS. Battery life, they kind of snuck in there, is supposedly going to be 2.5 to 6 hours, depending on the game. And from what I've heard, it's kind of closer to that 2.5-hour mark. I think that is very, very limited. And of course, as we read in the Eurogamer.net article, the system is apparently going to be throttled when you're playing it, when you sort of take it off the base. But even then, 2.5 hours is kind of low. They confirmed that the screen is going to be a capacitive touch panel. And I think, you know, they didn't announce that initially, but I think we all assumed that would be the case. They announced that 8 systems can be connected for local wireless gaming, which I guess is useful. I don't have 8 friends who are going to have this, so probably will not be using that feature. They are going to have video capture. They talked about their HD rumble and their IR camera on the little detachable controllers. Somewhat interesting. I think, for me personally, they look a little small, and I'm going to be inclined to get the Pro Controller, which they did announce would be sold separately, but they didn't announce a price. Then they showed all of these kind of games that you can play with this HD haptic feedback, a kind of quick draw Western gun game and a boxing game and stuff like that. And quite frankly, it just strikes me as a tech demo gimmick. We don't need any more motion control games from Nintendo. I mean, you can kind of include it as a little bonus, but to sort of launch the show with that, I felt it was kind of weak, and I just don't see the appeal to both of those games. And, you know, they said you could bring it to a party, it could become kind of an icebreaker, and I just do not see people doing that at all. They did announce, in fairness, the Splatoon 2. It's not my sort of game. I don't play a lot of online shooters, but I think that's meaningful for the people who are into Splatoon. Other game announcements, Super Mario Odyssey. Unfortunately, that's launching in the holidays of 2017. Would have preferred that maybe over the summer. To be honest, it looked a little generic. I guess the gimmick is that Mario is traveling outside of the Mushroom Kingdom, but some of those backgrounds, some of those levels just kind of looked like, the bad 3D Sonic game levels. Nonetheless, it's a Mario game. I will be picking it up. Xenoblade 2 was announced. And again, that's another meaningful game for a lot of people. I guess I personally just don't have the time to get into Xenoblade. Couldn't really finish Xenoblade Chronicles on the Wii U. They then talked about one of those Tecmo Koei massive beat-em-up games. I forget what they're called. This is Fire Emblem Warriors. Seems like all systems get those initially. To me, they're kind of weak, lazy efforts. They're very similar, maybe an hour of amusement, but nothing more to it. In my opinion. Then Dragon Quest was announced, but they only announced that it was coming to Japan. But I would have to imagine that Dragon Quest XI will make its way onto the Wii U and other territories. They showed you some footage of Shin Megami Tensei, the 25th anniversary. Square Enix actually had the Project Octopath Traveler, which was a new game that kind of looked like Bravely Default on a grander scale. Almost had the look of a pixel art diorama. So that was really interesting. And that is a game that I will look to pick up. No release dates on those. Then they showed you all of their supposed third-party support, which included people like Suda51 and some guy from Sega, essentially saying, hey, we want to create games for this system, but we have nothing to show you. We saw Skyrim, again, played it on PC, don't want to play it on anything other than PC. FIFA's coming, and, that was about it. They did have this kind of very, very quick cut, sort of one game after another look, and I could have sworn I saw something that looks like F-Zero in there, so maybe a little Easter egg, but really, if you look at these launch games, if they didn't announce Legend of Zelda coming out on March 3rd, this would have been insanely weak. I think what we have is a bundle of kind of mediocre launch titles, a lot of third-party promises that, based on Nintendo's track record, won't become reality. And then with Legend of Zelda, a potentially wonderful game. It looks absolutely beautiful. You kind of get the sense that the company has so deeply invested in this game. This is their project. So I think that saved it for me as far as wanting to pick it up. A couple of unanswered questions. It didn't look like we were getting different types of games based on the different usage scenarios. In other words, everything looked like a kind of console game. You didn't, or at least maybe in one of those montages I missed it, but I didn't see anything that looked like a 3DS game, that looked like a true handheld game. And again, based on the supposed throttling that's going to happen and the potential drop in frame rates when you take the system out of the dock, I'm not inclined to play a lot of the AAA games just on a handheld. I would want to experience Legend of Zelda on my television. So I kind of had this idea, I could have been totally wrong, that there would be, since this is replacing both systems, there would be the AAA kind of games, and then there would be the handheld, the 3DS kind of games. But, the third-party support, they claim they had over 80 developers on board, but I really think what they need to do is really focus in on the strengths. I've said this time and again when I critiqued the Wii U, when I did some other videos here on the Switch, is that you have to get away from the motion gaming gimmicks. You can trickle them out over time. I know there's probably part of the fan base that is into them, but those are not mechanics that bring in big audiences. It seems like they're chasing the casual Wii players of 10 years ago, and those people have moved on. I also think they shouldn't court the big third-party developers because they're probably not going to have the install base to really attract the Call of Duties. And, who knows if we're going to get anything beyond FIFA. Remember, they had Madden on the Wii U, and you didn't get anything else. So I think Nintendo needs to go after the games coming from Atlus and Sega and the Square Enix RPGs and really be a Japanese-centric console. And that was kind of the theme here of this presentation. By the way, the awkwardness of a lot of these hosts, including the kind of main guy that looked like a rather effeminate version of the guy that used to announce Pride fights back in the early 2000s. Anyway, a very uncomfortable kind of presentation, but in a way I appreciate that. They're just being themselves, I guess, Nintendo, and they don't mind coming off as a little awkward. And they did kind of make the argument that this is a combination of all the technologies from all the systems, but they need to focus on the strengths, the kind of games that you expect from Nintendo, the quirky, the different, the niche games, and just cut the fat as far as the motion controls and the AAA stuff. Hopefully they'll do that. I think if they do that, they've got a shot here, but I just don't see this being powerful enough to really court the true third-party content that you'll expect on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox, and who knows what's going to come with Project Scorpio. So again, all in all, an underwhelming presentation, really, but you got that gem at the end. You got that carrot. Zelda's coming out March 3rd. Needed to happen. And for me, it saves the excitement and the hype, and it saves, perhaps for me, the possibility of a day one purchase. So all in all, I come away enthused for The Legend of Zelda, but still kind of worried about the direction of the console and the direction of the company.